Two friends meet up to drink some beers and talk about past times. Not yesterday, but long ago, it's scandals, wars and crimes. From Stalin's reign to Prohibition, Tudors, Pompey, Bush and NASA's mission, Edison's Bulk, Genghis Khan's rise to victory. Forget your old teacher, it's time for Pint-Sized History.
Hi there, and welcome to Season 2 of Pint-Sized History. I'm Joe.
And I'm Zack.
And we're back, and we're ready to do it all over again. Zack!
Channeling your inner Corbyn there.
Yeah. Zack, how you doing, mate? You good?
I'm good, yeah. It's been a nice month off.
Yeah.
Been working hard in Parliament. As some of you may know, I do frequently talk about how I work in politics.
You do, yeah. All the time.
Started working for a new MP, so that's a lot of fun.
Nice.
Besides that, not much. Just playing a lot of video games.
That
sounds so neat.
Good for you, man. Happy for you. You know,
how about you?
I'm good. I'm not working too much in the lead up to Christmas because I work freelance. So for me, it depends how many shifts I get on a regular basis. But at the moment, I'm literally just trying to figure out Christmas presents because it's my least favorite part of Christmas. I hate it. I hate trying to figure out what people
just
want.
let Carrie do it.
If someone gives you a list, then that's great, and you can just pick one. But in general, I just have no idea what to get anyone. So this is like that period. This is going to come back out in January, but we're filming it a little bit earlier for this episode, which is why it's pre-Christmas. And I'm struggling to figure out what to get anyone, including you. What do I get you?
You gave me one. Oh, right.
What do you mean?
Because I have to get you
get
one.
Every year.
A history-related history-related gift.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
As you know, on Pint-Sized History, we like to have a little drink when we talk nonsense about history. And today I'm drinking a Asahi. How about you, Joe?
I'm drinking a Strike Lager, which is a very hipstery beer. It's a UK, so it's got nothing to do with what we're talking about today. But it's actually just really nice, and I really like it. So, cheers.
I'm drinking Asahi because today we're talking about Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor, wow.
Fascinating. Opening season 2 with a bit of a bang here. Because, in my opinion...
I said the Japanese. Sorry, Hawaii.
It's not really Hawaiians that are affected by it. Actually, it's the Americans, really. I mean, I think only 68 civilians were killed during it.
Yeah,
it
was the island that was attacked.
Yeah, they did damage to nature in Hawaii. But
sure,
not
and
so
the
much
ecosystem.
Anyway, what do you know about Pearl Harbor, Joe? I like to test your knowledge.
What do I know about? I feel like I know an alright amount. I know. Well, I don't want to spoil. What happened.
Spoilers!
I know, obviously, that it was basically, at this point in 1941, December 1941, that it had just been a war between the European nations that had scaled to places like Africa and Southeast Asia, but Japan, despite allying with Germany, in the loosest sense of the word, hadn't attacked anyone other than China. I think they threatened Russia, but it hadn't actually happened. Or maybe it did happen for a little bit in the
they had
1930s.
skirmishes on the border. At the Battle of Khalkhin Gol.
Yes, but that was it.
Yeah, when they got beaten by the Russians.
That's right, because that was the story of the guy...
Yang Chong-chang?
Yeah, the South Korean that went through 5 war zones.
It reminded me of episode 1 when we were talking about it.
That's right, yeah.
When I was doing my research for this one.
So I know that, basically Japan hadn't done too much at this point, apart from invade China. But in the scales of, attacking the big hitters... this was their moment. And for Japan, they knew that they basically wanted to control all of the China Sea and all those little islands, and they thought the best chance for them to do that would be to try and take out as much of the American Navy as in one big go and hope that somehow cripples them, which... on paper doesn't seem like a good idea. Maybe it seemed a good idea at the time, but it kind of is one of those moments that kind of it still now confounds me.
It doesn't seem like a good idea.
What were they thinking?
And they knew this as well. The Japanese admiral who's responsible for the combined fleet for the Japanese Navy said he has no expectation of success after 6 months against America. So. That's the idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
They know that they can't beat the giant, the industrial behemoth that is
biggest
America.
Giant. They had more industrial power than anyone.
It's absurd. I'll get to the numbers later about the American industry post Pearl Harbor, but yeah, you got to the main strokes of it. It's a Japanese surprise attack.
It was the surprise attack. That was the main thing. Was that for them to have any chance in this new war they were about to embark in, they had to surprise America and they did. The Americans were completely caught off guard. But that was their only hope, essentially, for having any success.
Yeah, and it was super successful. So they basically destroyed most of the American Pacific Fleet, but didn't matter. They didn't get a couple things right, and we'll get down to it in a short few moments. Yeah,
Can't wait.
I don't want to spoil myself for you. They didn't take out the aircraft carriers. You can't not take out the
aircraft
always.
carriers. Fuck.
What have the aircraft carriers ever done for us?
The Japanese high command came back. So how'd it go? Didn't hit the air. Didn't hit the aircraft. Oh, damn.
Everything but the aircraft.
Close.
So it's December 7th, 1941, 2 years or so into the start of the Second World War, and Japan, knowing that they want to invade American territorial guarantees in Southeast Asia, like the Philippines, decide to launch a surprise attack against America to basically knock them out of the war, make them come to like a peace treaty or something, or just leave them to their own devices as like an empire in South Asia.
Yeah.
They did knock out the American Pacific Fleet, not all of it, but most of it, and they crippled it immensely. But it didn't matter. About 6 months later, the American Navy was just back there, ready to fight again. And that's just what America does. You know, they love war. They have a lot of industrial base. They can make weapons like no one else in the world can.
Yeah.
Especially not the Japanese with their limited resources.
Yeah, it does seem a bit short-sighted in the sense that, like, even if they were able to wipe out everything, it's not like the Americans are just going to go, well, fair enough. No,
you got us.
It's like how many big countries with a loss of manpower would do that? Realistically, they're always going to come back. America weren't at war with anyone else, so it's like why would they just be like, nah, fair enough, have it. Yeah, take our navy.
There's a film Tora Tora Tora, which I don't know if you've seen. I haven't seen it, but I think it is based on Pearl Harbor, because Tora 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 is the command that the captain of the Air Force, Air Wing at the time that was launching the attack said, it's like basically go, attack.
Right.
And he says that all we have done is awoken a sleeping giant and filled him with terrible resolve.
Yes.
It was the deadliest foreign attack against the United States in history until
9/11.
9/11. Yeah, well done, Joe. And
has there been any other? Since 1945, that's the only time the Americans have ever been attacked.
When did we attack them? Is it
in the 1800s?
Yeah. We got them good.
1812, I think.
We got them good.
Yeah, we burned down the White House.
Yeah.
We let them know. 1-0, baby.
1-1 actually.
Yeah.
So the final toll was around 2,400 Americans killed, around 1,200 injured. 4 battleships were sunk, 4 battleships were damaged, 3 light cruisers were damaged, 3 destroyers were damaged. 188 aircraft were destroyed and 159 aircraft were damaged. Bad result for the Americans that day.
Yes.
Upon hearing about the attack, President Franklin D. Roosevelt gave a joint speech to Congress. You know what that speech is called?
He says the date and then he goes, a day that will live in infamy.
Yesterday is December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Yeah.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked. Is that a good Roosevelt impression?
I don't know.
I think it is.
I don't think
listened
so.
to the speech. But
you listened to the speech?
Yeah.
So why are you asking me?
I don't know. Who knows? I think it's all right. Deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with the nation and was still in conversation with its government. This is still Roosevelt, by the way. I'm just back being me.
Yeah.
with its government looking towards maintenance of peace in the Pacific. 1 hour after, Japanese air squadrons had commenced bombing in the American island of Oahu, which is in Hawaii. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. And that they did, Joe.
Amen.
30 minutes later, Congress declared war on Japan, and 3 years, 8 months, and 26 days later, Japan surrenders to the United States after the atomic bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
Yes. The Pacific War between those two really starts with a bang and ends with a bang, doesn't it? Bloody hell.
Bigger bang, yeah. Whew. I found the Pacific War like way more fascinating than the Western Front. Like, the Eastern Front is spectacularly gruesome and really interesting. But the Western Front's like quite small scale in comparison.
Yeah.
And then the Pacific War is just insane. Yeah. Like the island hopping campaign, like Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima, which is where the Americans launched raids and naval invasions on Japanese bases in the Pacific. Insane fighting, like super brutal.
Yeah.
In like really horrible conditions as well, of like basically like rainforests and stuff like that. It's just, if you haven't seen it, go watch The Pacific. Band of Brothers is a better series, but The Pacific is a really good dive into
I was
the story of
actually
American
saying this to someone that just started watching it at work the other day. The Pacific, although it might not be the tightest TV ever, it might not be the most well made, it is probably the best rendition I've ever seen of the brutality of war on a really high budget scale. It's shocking, especially the second half of it. It's just really difficult to watch at times. And I think it certainly paints a picture of what it would have been like, especially in the Pacific. the conditions are so gruesome. So
Yeah. Also,
yeah.
Letters to Iwo Jima, one of my favourite films, Clint Eastwood. It's really, really good.
Yeah.
And that tells you a bit about the Japanese psyche in the Pacific War, which we're not going to be talking about today.
Okay.
Let's give a bit of background. Do you know what Japan were doing prior to Pearl Harbor? Give me a short history from about the 19th century to 20th century Japan, if you can. And
I can. I think I can. Let me cook. So, I believe that Japan went on a very isolationist period for a long time, where they felt very, they just basically cut themselves off from the rest of the world. And then they thought, all right, we're going to announce ourselves to the world. We're going to fucking get to we realize how far behind everyone else we are because of this isolationist period. Let's militarize, let's modernize, let's go fucking ham. And they build up their forces to a dramatic level. And then they're like, right, now let's show the world this kind of Japanese spirit, which, because the Japanese mindset is fascinating in and of itself. Probably one of the most fascinating of any of the countries in World War II. How they get to this stage, and their kind of Bushido spirit and samurai-esqueness is, even the concept of kamikaze planes is not a thing in any other nation. So all that stuff is, it builds this nation that's ready to fight and be super aggressive, and they invade Manchuria, which is basically China or Korea.
Yep.
I don't actually know where Manchuria is.
It's like it's just above Korea. So I think.
Oh, so would Russia have it then at this point, if we were talking modern day?
No, it's China now.
Oh, it's China.
Yeah,
okay.
and then it was still China. It was still part of China.
Right. So basically, northern China is what they invade, and they go on some campaigns there, and then but reaching 1941, like I said at the beginning, they need to. They want to take over the entire sea. They want to get all the oil that is in the Southeast Asia. They want to control all of it. But to do that, they need to start attacking American ports or allies of America, including France and Britain. We had ports in Southeast Asia. So to do that, they have to attack the Americans.
You're sort of right. If this were a drinking game, I would have a couple sips because you've done all right. If you watch the Prohibition episode, that would make sense. So I was looking for more of the history, and the context around the Empire of Japan, but that works. You are right. They did want to announce their name in the kind of world stage because they kind of felt they'd been neglected. I'll just dive in then.
Oh, I've forgotten a moment. So I was just filling up my beer, and I remembered.
You genuinely shocked me.
I remembered after you said that. The other thing, which I'm sure you were about to mention, World War One, they got involved on the side of Britain and France and stuff.
They did, yeah.
And then did some stuff. Not sure what. Probably fight China or something. I don't know. And then they, or maybe it was the German areas of the Southeast Asia.
Should I just go?
And then the Treaty of Versailles happens, which we have talked about before and how shit it was.
Yeah, great treaty.
And the Japanese turn up.
Top two treaties.
The Japanese turn up all suited and booted, like, here we fucking go, lads. Let's fucking go. They sit down in the treaty, like, come on then. What we get? What's our share of the prize? No, everyone ignores them. They're excuse me, guys, is this thing on? What about what we get? And they were just like, anyway, just so let's take this part of Germany. And there's the Rhineland, and they're like, what about us? So they felt fuming at that as well.
They got some German holdings near Japan, but
nothing.
very little based on their contribution. We covered a lot about Japan in our Oda Nobunaga episode.
Yes.
And honestly, up until the late 19th century, it's not very different. It's still the Tokugawa shogunate, and that's the state till about 1868 when the Tokugawa shogunate basically gets overthrown. They've been the rulers of Japan for 250 years or something. And we get to the Meiji Restoration, which is where the Emperor Meiji stripped the shogunate of their power, and it basically takes Japan back to this practical imperial rule, which is where the shogun is, the emperor is the strongest person in the land, because Japanese people hold the emperor in
god,
extreme
basically.
regard. They say he's the descendant of Amaterasu, which is like the goddess of the sun.
Right.
During this time, Japan wanted to create a strong centralized state. They wanted to modernize. They wanted to have an established national language because it was still kind of split into warlords and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So they go from this feudal system to what's considered a modern country today. They had a lot of foreign influence. They sought advice from foreign powers inside Japan about how to expand their industrial base and move farmers to the cities. They built shipyards, smelters, mills. Had entrepreneurs popping up, and with that you get capitalism, and you get people moving away from the countryside and kind of seeing the benefits of private industry and moving to city centres, and And yeah, they shifted in literally less than like 50 years from what was like a semi-samurai state to a genuine Western power. And that's what capitalism kind of does. When people start like feeling the money and where it's going, they follow it, and I guess attitudes change, which is as a critical person of capitalism, it's just is it good? Who knows? We'll dive into it later. History of capitalism episode. I don't know what I'm getting at. Stop making those eyes.
You're a commie. You're red.
Yeah, red scare. So Japan then emerged as one of like the biggest players in Asia, and they want to expand its sphere of influence. So they have the first Sino-Japanese war, which is a war with China. Any war with Japan and China is simply called Sino-Japanese. And the Russian-Japanese war, and they start kind of winning these battles and wars quite well against the Russian army, the Russian Navy. They absolutely decimate them. And by 1910, they're taking control of Taiwan, Korea, half of Sakhalin, which I don't know if you know, but it's a fish-shaped island in like the far east coast of Russia.
Don't know.
My partner Carrie, one of her colleagues actually lives there, or is from there, from South Sakhalin.
Wow.
So essentially, I think she's North Sakhalin. So I think she's Russian, but she would have been Japanese had she lived on half of it 50 years ago, maybe 80 years ago. Weird tangent. Emperor Meiji dies. He's died. The Emperor, the descendant of the sun, has died.
Well, at what point? What year are we in now?
This is. I don't know what year that is,
Fuck
but
me.
but I know what happens next. His son Emperor Taisho comes in.
Oh.
He's very sickly straight away. Dies in 1926,
Oh.
and then Joe.
Hirohito.
he'll-
Let's go! Love a bit of Hirohito.
I think like Joe's favorite like dictator or like semi-problematic public figure is Hirohito.
But it's not. It's purely for the name. I just think Hirohito is an awesome name.
And then bang, Joe. What happens in the 1920s early 1930s that devastates basically all of the world's economies?
The Great Depression.
The Great Depression, sad.
Sad.
And following this, as happens in like economic downturns, you get a nationalist and like kind of radical political revivals. So in Japan, we move into a period of ultranationalism and statism, and you get different groups popping up vying for power. Breakouts of right-wing political thinking, such as the Kodaha and the Toseiha factions, who vied for power during this period. But they both had very similar beliefs, and this is kind of the way that Japanese society is going towards this idea of eliminating corruption, having this like pure military for national defense, and expansionism. And this is important because basically the Kodaha and the Toseiha factions differ about how to basically forward this idea of expansionism. I think it's the Toseiha faction wanted to strike south, which is like go to Southeast Asia, so British Malaya at the time, which is Malaysia now, and like Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, which is Indonesia, go the way south like Papua New Guinea and Australia and stuff like that for resources. Whereas the Kodaha wanted to go north and fight the Soviets, which would have ended terribly for Japan, I imagine.
Yeah.
Maybe better though, because I mean in 1940, obviously Germany invaded Soviet Russia.
That's true.
So Soviet Union, sorry. So maybe it would have been better than them
Was it
taking
41?
out the Soviet Union and then going after America
They
together.
invaded in 41.
41, yeah. Oh, it was 41. You're right.
But,
yeah.
but I mean, this is December, so obviously it's
Um,
before Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, and then Japan also, the Toseiha faction end up coming to dominance, so the Strike South doctrine just comes to prominence. And they also pull out the Washington Naval Treaty and be going on massive shipbuilding programs, and they start building super heavy battleships, which weigh like 72,000 tons. I don't know if you can imagine what that is, but it's
I can't.
no. They make
Who could?
I can't, but it's big. Largest battleships in history, and battleships are enormous. If you've seen the destroyer in the Thames, you seen that? That's a big ship, and
Yes,
that's a tiny ship.
Yes,
It's really small.
Yeah.
So imagine 10 times the size of that, just floating down the Thames. They were called the Yamato and Musashi, and they were just a class of super heavy battleships. So they're super nationalistic, Japan. In 1930, they invade Manchuria, like you said.
Yes.
And then invaded China following the Marco Polo bridge incident in 1937. So you could say, if you wanted to say this, that the World War II started in 1937 when Japan invaded
well,
China.
Some do, right? Some experts do suggest that World War II is actually the conception that it started when Germany invaded Poland is kind of unfair because the world was already at war in many places before that, and Japan and Manchuria is the biggest.
Very true. You could also say maybe the Spanish Civil War as well. It's a bit.
You could, but that's a civil war. That's
Yeah.
not. That's not a world at war, is it? Let's
But
be
you
real.
have like genuinely the Soviets and the Germans fighting on the ground there. And now kind of moving on, like we said about Japan, they built an immense navy, they've invaded China, they want to go after the resources in the southern Asian area. And now we come to America. What are they doing? You must know. You yourself are quite a big proponent of Americanism. You love America. You always talk about how much you love it. You got family over there. You're always over there.
That's true. I do have family.
So
over
what
there
was happening in America in the
Philadelphia.
1900s?
Funnily enough, I did a podcast episode on this, which would be the Prohibition, and really we just talked about the entire, 1900s. Basically, it was a time of immense change in America, and when World War One
Where's this
happened,
stuff?
the Americans, felt. Fuck it, let's get involved, let's show our force, and they ended up emerging as a huge superpower by the end of it. When the next 20 years obviously had the Great Depression, the Prohibition, huge social change, and when it reaches the 1939, America and the American public are not interested in war at all. For them, World War One was pretty grim. They didn't enjoy it. The country has just gotten out of a huge depression, and they are now
A great one.
a great one, in fact, possibly the greatest. Basically, the Americans felt that they've just got now back on their feet and they're happy. We don't want to enter a war on foreign soil, which in a way makes sense. Even if you've got allies in Europe, most Americans, especially at this point, did not travel. They'd never been to Europe. Why should they care about a war that's happening in a completely different continent? Everything's fine here. And despite Roosevelt actually secretly wanting to help Churchill and to help Europe and sort out this horrible tyranny
Sort out the Germans
of the Nazis. He just couldn't, because it would if he started pushing for it, it might cost him an election. It was an extremely unpopular move for the Americans, and Roosevelt knew that it would take something big for American opinions to change to what they ended up doing. And funnily enough, here it comes right on their lap.
Churchill was really good at that. He was really good at lobbying the Americans to join the fighting in Western Europe. Even after Pearl Harbor, they didn't really want to get involved in Europe, but were eventually leaning towards it. He was always there, flying over there, having meetings with Roosevelt. Come to Britain. We need help.
Very persuasive man.
Yes.
So I'm sure the Americans
Flies you a bit of champagne and whatever else he does.
Also, he doesn't sleep, so he's going for like 24 hours. He's like, guys, come on, come join the war in Europe. It's like, Winston, it's 4 a.m. Please. Never come on.
Come on. You're absolutely spot on. They're incredibly isolationist. They had the guaranteed defense of the Philippines, and they thought of themselves as the protectors of the Pacific. But really, they do not very much. They do what's called Lend-Leasing, which is a really good program, where they basically just gave materiel and weapons to... Weapons is material, but they gave materiel to countries fighting
Supplies,
other wars,
yeah.
and they did massive amounts of it as well.
Like the current day. I mean, it was a classic case of, because of extreme circumstances, meaning we can't get involved. Instead, we will get involved in every way that doesn't mean we're involved. So we will literally lend you weapons. We will lend you food and provisions. If you're isolated, we will do whatever we can to help you in the fight, except put our own men on the ground.
Think their support for Ukraine, but on steroids, basically, the Lend-Lease Act.
Yeah.
And they're also a staunch ally of the Chinese. They have good relations with them.
Times change, eh?
But yeah, very much so. I mean, to be fair, China's changed a fuckload since then.
Yeah.
It was back then. It was General Chiang Kai-shek. Who was the leader of the nationalists there, and then it became Mao Zedong.
The communists.
And even after the rape of Nanking in 1937 and the genocide that's happening to Chinese civilians on a mass basis, they still weren't getting involved.
Right.
But they did start sanctioning the Japanese. They started restricting oil and scrap metal and steel and aviation fuel. All things Japan really, really needed to keep the war in China going, to get more resources, to keep fighting somewhere else. So this kind of pushed things along a little bit. By sanctioning them, you push Japan into a situation where they either had to stop doing everything or go after you, which is never going to work out well.
Yeah.
All hell is basically about to break loose.
Yeah.
They've been negotiating for some time about whether they can get them out of China, the Americans, the Japanese, and trying to basically bring the war intentions to a close. And this kind of breaks down, and it completely fails. And the Japanese actually send a declaration of war to the US on the morning of Pearl Harbor, but it doesn't reach the Americans until an hour after because of delays in like transcribing it and breaking the codes and stuff like that. But really, they were debating about whether they wanted to even send them a declaration of war anyway. And I think historians tend to disagree about whether Japan did send a declaration of war. They say they did, but likely it is they didn't.
Yeah, I guess it could be just a PR play, make it seem like they weren't being so scummy.
Yeah. So this is the size of the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor.
And to clarify, I know you said this before. To clarify, for the Japanese to believe they have a chance of winning this war, they need to destroy the majority, if not the vast majority, of the U.S. Pacific Fleet.
Absolutely.
So go ahead.
So at Pearl Harbor was stationed almost all of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. There were 102 ships stationed there. 69 of them received no damage following Pearl Harbor. 15 received minor damage. 11 more ships sustained medium to heavy damage. And 7 ships were sunk at Pearl Harbor. Only 3 of those were a total loss because Pearl Harbor is incredibly shallow, which means that you can, if a ship sinks, probably the top of it's probably sticking out, so you can pull it back up. But there are the following vessels stationed at Pearl Harbor: the U.S. Pennsylvania, battleship; USS Arizona, battleship; USS California, battleship; USS Nevada, battleship; USS Oklahoma, battleship; USS Tennessee.
Battleship?
Yeah, battleship.
Yep.
And I don't know if you know about prevailing naval doctrines at the time, but battleships were gold standard. Like, if you were going to fight a war on the sea, you need battleships, and you have very few of them. They're not things you can build easily. They take years to build. So there's 7 battleships here, enormously important, vital parts of the US fleet. There's also the USS Maryland, West Virginia, Utah, all battleships, 20 destroyers, 4 submarines, 20 minesweepers, 10 smaller boats, either gunboats or tenders, a number of logistics ships, a load of tugboats, torpedo boats, miscellaneous vehicles like hospital ships, and so on. It's enormous. They've concentrated their entire might on this small island in Oahu.
Which does show that the Americans genuinely had no idea that this might happen. Like they, you know, you wouldn't do this if you were under any idea that maybe you might be attacked at some point. But the reality was they just who's going to attack us?
But crucially, Pearl Harbor offers really good defense from ships. It offers it's really well protected. It's basically like sat within mountains. If you can see the picture behind me, you can sort of see we have a picture of. This is a battleship. This is the
an
actual
aerial
harbour
view of. I mean, you can see it. You can.
So you can see it's sort of mountainous in the background, and you have the rows of battleships and the smaller boats around it.
Yeah.
But it's basically protected by mountains, and it's like one like kind of narrow, slim channel going in and out, or 2 channels going in and out, which means it's really well protected naturally from other enemy fleets. But importantly, it's not protected from aircraft, and Pearl Harbor was not an naval attack. It was an air attack. The aircraft are a vital part of the Japanese Navy at this point. All this destruction that's caused eventually onto the American fleet is by planes. So here's how the attack happened. On 26 November 1941, the Japanese Imperial Navy ordered the fleet under the command of Vice Admiral Nagumo Chuichi, including 6 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, a number of destroyers and midget submarines, alongside 414 planes to set to sea. They departed Hitokapu Bay, around 3,500 miles away from their meeting point, or within 230 miles north of Oahu. And the plan of attack was for the Japanese to bombard the vital ships and the entire American Navy with a couple of ways of dive bombings, torpedo bombings, strafing runs, high-altitude horizontal bombings. And this was the brainchild of, as I said earlier, Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku, who's the commander-in-chief.
It's his idea.
Yeah, and what a great idea it is, until it's not. They took some measures. They knew that they might get attacked at Pearl Harbor, the Americans. They took some measures to counter it, like they bunched up their aircraft in doors, in protections on some of the aircraft. I think it was like Wheeler Field or something was where they put the most of their aircraft and ammo. They had radars around the base, and in fact, on the morning of the attack, radars around the base picked up sightings of the Japanese waves of bombings coming in, and they did report it. But apparently, the duty commander was having breakfast.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah.
Like it couldn't have been avoided because they didn't have like the personnel. They could have scrambled like fighters and.
It could. I mean, some of it could have been avoided. Obviously, the main thing would have still been tough.
At 6:15, so at 6:30 a.m.
It's in the morning, isn't it? Yeah, early morning.
Yeah, so the actual attack happens at 7:48 a.m.
Right.
This is when like the first planes start launching their bombs. But at 6:30, a destroyer Ward encounters a midget submarine and sinks it. Basically, the first shots of the Pacific War happened at 6:30 a.m. So you're right; they do have like several spottings of the Japanese fleet and signs they're coming, but there's very little action or kind of belief that this could possibly happen because, for all intents and purposes, they're not at war. Yeah. They're neutral nations, and who would have the gall and the audacity to invade America? Yeah, insanely, not those people from over there in 4,000 miles away from us.
Miles.
What they
away.
do? Yeah, they're not going to do anything to us. Come the 7th of December, midget submarines snuck into the base of Pearl Harbor ahead of the impending attack, and the first wave of 183 aircraft took off about 6:15 a.m. Like I said, 15 minutes later, the destroyer USS Ward finds one of the submarines and sinks it. At 7 a.m., radar spotted the first waves. Like I said, they reported it in, but because the shift commander was having breakfast, he couldn't see. Imagine how bad you feel being that commander.
He's having sausage and eggs, man.
Apparently using powdered eggs and I don't know, maybe sausage, yeah.
Sounds hearty.
You'd imagine a sausage, wouldn't you?
Oh, hell yeah.
The air assault begins at 7:48, beginning with the slower, more vulnerable torpedo bombers at the beginning, followed by fighters and other dive bombers. This is because torpedo bombers have to fly at super low altitude. They have to fly at basically 20 feet above sea level because they have to fly in a super straight line, release their torpedoes, and as they do, have to stay on like a straight current towards the objective.
Right.
Torpedoes are scary.
Yeah.
There's a film, I think it's called Wolfpack or something, and it's about German U-boats attacking the Atlantic merchant convoys.
Okay.
And it's fascinating and it's scary.
Yeah.
It's all in the dead of night. You can't see anything, and all of a sudden the radar, boop,
Yeah,
boop,
yeah.
boop, and then you're
U-boats
set upon.
And, submarine warfare and stuff is just a bizarre, terrifying thing in and of itself. It's one of the crazier parts of World War II for me is the idea of U-boats and shooting underwater, and I think it was like 50%. I could be wrong about this, but it's close if I'm wrong. It's like 50% of U-boat personnel, German U-boat personnel, would die before they finished their tour.
Yeah, probably.
It was crazy numbers. Basically, you knew that if you were going into that tuna can,
a pressurized can,
then there's a decent chance you're not coming out of it.
Yeah,
terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the start of the war they had a lot more success than they did towards the end. After we broke the Enigma code and knew where they were going to be, and then also developed better radar and sonar systems. So then we just knew where they were, and dropped down a depth charge, and that's like 30 people just gone in an instant.
Yeah. It's just bizarre, and it's not a nice way to go either.
No, either drowning or just crushed.
Pressured.
Yeah, so that's fun.
Anyway.
War isn't nice, and thankfully for us, we won't experience it, or hopefully you should not experience it.
Yeah, you sound very confident there, but the reality is,
it's around the corner.
The world's getting more war-y. I'll tell you that.
We do often preach doom on our podcast. So why don't we be positive and say it's not coming, and that diplomacy and negotiations between governments.
Do you believe that?
No.
So then you're lying. You're lying to our viewers.
I'm sorry.
Everyone listening to you now is saying you're a fucking liar.
How could you? We'll be listening back to this in a year's time in the trenches.
It's like, God, we were naive.
Just out of curiosity, what branch of the army would you most like to serve in?
I got asked this the other day. I know it sounds ridiculous, but if I if I had to be in the army, then I'd genuinely try to be in the Marines. I'd be like, I want to be the best of the best, because at least
surrounded by good people.
At least I know I'm doing something that's worthy, and I know they're often put into the most dangerous situations.
Were you saying that people?
But you're also the most well prepared for it. So
were you saying that people that are the privates in the army and are not
no,
worthy?
No. I think I have extreme respect for everyone that's in the army, and I'm not saying that I could be a Marine anyway. I probably can't. But I'm just saying, if I had to choose, then I would try for that first, just because I'd want to feel like I was doing that. I'm sure it'd be extremely difficult, and maybe I wouldn't be able to, but that's my mentality of what I would like to do if shit hit the fan, which I don't necessarily think that it would, at least for the UK. But that's my thinking. And yourself?
I'm scared of heights and I don't like water, but I would.
Then you're fucked.
But I would like to be a fighter pilot. I think that'd be sick. And I think I've got like the fast twitch reactions and muscles to be able to do that. The only problem, my eyesite is terrible.
You're a drone operator, man.
Yeah,
you're
I'm
literally-
with the
you're
controller.
You're just a drone. You're sitting in a nice, like, warm office in Brackley.
Having a cup of
in
tea.
Brackley, yeah, with a cup of tea, and you're just holding a little.
In Brackley?
I don't know. I'm sure. I don't know where.
Is
they
that
have
what Mercedes are?
it. Yeah. Well, don't. I was about to say some conspiracy that makes no sense. Anyway.
The attack lasted for 90 minutes. Wheeler Field, large airbase, and the key target of the attack was immediately strafed. It's the most northern airbase. So the planes were coming basically from the north and were splitting off into 3 sections, eventually coming through the island and pincering Pearl Harbor itself. Wheeler Field was the first target. It was a large airbase where a lot of the aircraft were stationed. Most of them there were destroyed. The first wave basically split up, like I said. And the most important objectives were Hickman Field, Wheeler Field, like I said, and Battleship Row. The second wave consisting of another 171 planes hit an hour later.
Right.
So immediately a number of ships were hit, with some of them almost capsizing from the effects of being literally smashed into the sides by torpedoes. When a ship gets hit by a torpedo or successive torpedoes, it like keels onto its side and basically is about to roll over. And then the more water that fills it, it basically starts to sink and go down. And despite being on a low alert status, men rushed out to man aircrafts, guns on ships, anti-aircraft, shoot in some cases, because literally the aircraft flying 20 feet above you, some Americans stationed there literally throw rocks at the planes. And it's, you can, from eyewitness testimony, they say that you can literally see the pilot. One of the survivors of the day said they literally saw the rising sun flag on the back of the aircraft with the pilot, and as Japanese pilots, where they have a white scarf and the goggles, obviously. I don't know if you have in your head an idea of the image, smiling at him as he was strafing the airfield. So honestly, that nightmare fuel.
Yeah. Just shows the state of panic, really. You literally wake up thinking it's just going to be a normal day. And am I right in thinking it was a Sunday as well?
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah, because I remember thinking that a lot of people were in church or had the day off.
Not a Sunday.
Well, it's a Sunday, so
God's
it's like...
Day.
I don't know if they actually planned that, because it would make sense for the Japanese to go on a Sunday, but I think it just meant that basically... everyone was relaxed anyway, but on a Sunday you're going to be more relaxed. There's going to be people that are off going to church or spending the day. It's going to be one of the least. It's one of those days where everyone is at their most relaxed, and suddenly the sirens start hearing. You hear the planes, and you look up, and they're literally at eye level, almost at eye level with you. And yeah, I mean, it must have just been complete shock and complete panic.
You literally get woken up by explosions.
Yeah,
and it's completely off guard. The casualties for the Americans, like I said, numbered around 2,400, with 2,000 sailors killed, 218 soldiers killed, 109 Marines, 68 civilians, and 18 ships were sunk or run aground, including 5 battleships.
Yes.
So the biggest part of the day, or the most iconic part of Pearl Harbor, where the most casualties occurred, was on the battleship, the USS Arizona.
Yes.
A Japanese bomber, or a number of Japanese bombers, dropped around 4 bombs on the Arizona, with one of the armor-piercing bombs ripping through layers of hull on the ship and smashing into the forward ammo magazine.
Yeah.
So this basically is a area of the ship which is full to the brim of explosives-filled ammo. Yeah. And this sends a 500-foot fireball in the air as the entire ammo dump bursts, basically killing everyone on board almost immediately.
And giving quite a sight as well, in the sense that if you're there on the ground and you're freaking out and you're panicking and you see all this stuff and you're like, oh my god, we're being attacked, what is happening? This feels like the end of the world, but I was not ready for this. And stuff's happening, but there's not you're dealing, you're doing whatever you can in every moment. You're just reacting, and then suddenly you see this huge ball of fire from one of your prime ships. That would be the biggest moment of dread for many people that are there at that moment. They would see that and go, oh shit, this is serious. Like, if this continues, if the other ships go, then we are fucked. And not only are we fucked, but maybe this is, they don't know the capabilities of the Japanese. But most of them don't even know it's the Japanese at this point. So they don't know this could be anyone. And this could be, what if the entire city is going to be taken down? What if, they're attacking the mainland as well at this point? Yeah. If you're the common person there at that moment, seeing that big ball of fire, the huge explosion, would be the most terrifying moment of the day.
Absolutely. And it's devastating as well. It kills 1,177 of the officers and crewmen aboard the ship.
Wow.
And bear in mind, it's not fully manned either, so that's pretty much, you can imagine it's probably about half capacity, because they might be, it's docked. So they're not all on it. They might be sleeping there.
It's a Sunday.
Not everyone's on the ship. So that's basically probably every single person on the ship.
Yeah.
There might be some who are able to get to safety. And that does happen on other ships. Besides the USS Arizona, which experiences the worst of the day, there's also the USS Oklahoma, which was sunk by multiple torpedoes, later repaired and salvaged. But 429 crew members died on the ship. Survivors had to jump 50 feet off the ship into burning oil on the water to get away to safety.
That's tough.
The USS West Virginia was hit by 2 bombs and 7 torpedoes that ripped through its hull. It was still actually later repaired and salvaged. 106 men killed in the attack on the vessel. The USS California, hit by 2 bombs and two torpedoes. Crewmen abandoned ship and it sunk. Suffered 165 casualties on board. The USS Nevada was hit by 1 torpedo and 6 bombs and was later run aground, but then eventually slipped off the beach and sunk. There were 60 crewmen killed on the USS Nevada. It was subsequently salvaged. By around 9 a.m., the attack was ending, and the Japanese went for a few more targets. Elusive ones they didn't get before. They knew the USS Pennsylvania was in dry dock at the time, which means it's being repaired in a factory just off the port, basically. They hit the dock. They didn't destroy the Pennsylvania, but they did destroy some destroyers around it.
Right.
I'm saying the word destroy a lot. I mean, the boats are called destroyers
That's what
too.
they're called, yeah.
Yeah, but by this time, the Americans started offering more resistance, and the Japanese couldn't strike as fiercely. They started manning some fighters, scrambling resistance, and basically getting on the anti-aircraft guns, and it made actually finding the targets that they found in the beginning a lot more difficult. So they had to go for literally anything that was around. So by the time they stopped attacking battleships and started hitting anything, so cruisers and tugboats and stuff like that, the Arizona was irreparably damaged. It suffered the 500-foot fireball. Its forward magazine was destroyed. So it sunk and still lies at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. And there's a memorial for it today. And I can only imagine how heart-wrenching that must be.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And importantly, Pearl Harbor was shallow waters. So many of the ships can actually... there's pictures of some of the ships literally poking out the water, the ones that are sunk. It's not very deep, so they kind of thought that torpedo bombers couldn't actually operate well in the harbour because of the lack of depth to the waters. So a lot of the ships that do eventually get sunk are able to be pulled up, repaired, and sent back out to action. A lot of the ships that were sunk eventually featured back again in the Pacific War, some of them in battles literally a year later or 2 years later, which is a testament to the industrial capabilities of America. But the biggest problem for the Japanese, and I did allude to this earlier, I don't know if you remember what I said.
The aircraft carriers.
The aircraft carriers, yeah. What do you think the aircraft carriers are important, Joe?
Well, aircraft carriers are one of the most important, and have been one of the most important things in any army, navy, any part of your military for like the last 100 years. They are crucial in so many ways. Having planes be able to protect the ships around you means that if you take your aircraft carrier somewhere, they kind of automatically become the most valuable thing in your navy. They're incredibly important and incredibly useful and incredibly difficult to, it takes a while to build them. They're very expensive. So you want to keep hold of them and you don't want them to sink. Mm-hmm. And the Japanese didn't get them, basically.
Yeah. So there's 3 big aircraft carriers, the USS Lexington, the Enterprise, and the Saratoga, which were all absent. You might see there's like a common thing here with the American battleships being named after states.
Places, yeah.
All the battleships named after states. That's
cool. I like that. That's a nice way to call your ships. We do like royalty and stuff.
What was the recent one we had, which was like supposed to be Boatface, which was
Boatface.
eventually HMS. It was eventually
but we always do the Prince of Wales or Elizabeth or stuff like that.
It's now the HMS Attenborough.
Attenborough?
Boatface.
Is it?
Yeah,
I think
so.
Cool one.
So by this time, you said it yourself, importance of carriers had superseded battleships. Battleships really weren't important. There were no pitched battles with like enormous fleets on either side coming together. It was all long range, send in waves of aircraft because aircraft
had become the game of the day now. Aircraft was crucial to pretty much any operation anywhere. It had really grown in stature from World War I, where aircraft was just about being used, and now in World War II, aircraft is like super important to everything. So having ships that can carry aircraft makes that ship the best, basically.
Yeah. They're more maneuverable. They can fight at longer range. They're quicker. Deadlier, honestly, with some of the ammunition they can hold on them. They can hold torpedoes, and big bombs like the B-17, which is I think it was B-17. Then I always get confused with like the B whatever number it is. These are enormous like bombers that have hundreds of basically tons worth of explosives in their hull, and they just let rip loads of bombs onto battleships and cities below.
Yeah.
But the Japanese didn't really understand the importance of carriers at the time. Some of them were proponents of aircraft carriers and this new doctrine of like air warfare. But they chose to invest in battleships because they had this like sort of traditional thinking.
It's a huge L, Japan. Huge L, mate. What are you thinking there?
Yeah, so they went for these super heavy battleships rather than smaller craft and more aircraft, and that probably was a vital decision for them in not having this war go on for longer than it could have done.
That's true.
The carriers eventually played a vital role in the Battle of the Coral Sea and Midway, which America won.
Midway, yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of considered the turning point. That's probably worthy of this episode as well. Midway is considered like the turning point of the Pacific, where up until this point, Japan had the upper hand. Midway is this huge battle between both navies that the Americans, a lot by luck as well.
They broke the code.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
So many different random things like kind of make it sway each way and that, and then the Americans just pinch it. And from then on, the Americans on the offensive until the end of the war. Mm-hmm. The main thing that the Japanese did was, by doing this, they've awoken the beast, as that commander said. From then on, America feels Roosevelt no longer has to try and convince his public. They're ready. They're happy to go to war. They're happy to help their allies. So they start fighting in the Pacific. They help at D-Day. They push the Germans into Berlin. They become by far one of the main players of World War II, despite the fact that they weren't there for the first 2 years.
Do you have my notes? Are you reading these?
No.
Because you've got way ahead of yourself,
natural,
my friend.
Natural, baby. It just comes to me.
I actually think he has a history podcast. So yeah, you're spot on, and you've gracefully taken it away from my mouth. But I'm gonna go just very quickly to wrap up because we're at the end of what happened on the day. So I'm gonna talk about the brief next steps, what happens in the war. But most of it I've already said earlier. Rear Admiral Chuichi Hara summed it up by saying, "We won a great tactical victory at Pearl Harbor, and by doing so, we lost the war." Which is an unbelievably good quote. Like,
yeah, it is.
It's insanely
sums it up, doesn't it?
Like the self-awareness of that as well to be kind of coming to those conclusions. But at the same time as they conducted the Pearl Harbor attack, they also followed through their strike south doctrine. The Japanese took over Thailand, Burma, British Malaya, Dutch East Indies, French Indochina, the Philippines, and some of Papua New Guinea, presenting a big problem for the Australians because it's basically like, a stone's throw away from them. They'd also taken over a number of island chains like the Mariana Islands, Carolina Islands, Solomon and Marshall Islands, and stationed troops there and basically fortified this area as like a bulwark against American incursion. Into
We've got it, now we hold it.
Yeah, but the Americans didn't go for that strategy. They ended up going on the island hopping campaign, which rendered these fortified areas redundant.
Yeah.
They built up massive amounts of military and army and personnel in these bases, and the Americans go, we're going to sail around that, actually. I don't think we're going to get involved.
We don't need that.
Yeah, they literally launch their planes from like anywhere within a couple thousand miles. So they go for areas which are less defended, but this becomes like really boggy. The Japanese keep advancing until they reach Guadalcanal, which is the second episode of the Pacific, or the first episode, which is a great episode.
TV show, yeah.
It's the first like confrontation on the ground of American Marines and Japanese Army soldiers. And the Americans beat them there, and this kind of turns the tide in the advance, and they start suffering defeat after this. Yeah. In America, what happens next? Well, Roosevelt gives his declaration of war with a famous speech of a date that will live in infamy. America's economy then transitions to this wartime economy. Yeah. They start pumping, they shift from consumer goods and factories that are building luxuries and daily necessities to military equipment and items that are desperately needed for the war effort. The industrial might that they possessed was ridiculous, like truly frightening. Yeah. The American Navy at the start of Pearl Harbor was only 380,000 people strong. They had around 790 ships. By the end of the war, the Navy was 3.4 million people big. They had around 6,768 ships in active service, which is almost 10 times the amount at the start. And they had around 99 aircraft carriers in that fleet from the 3 they had earlier in 4 years, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. But also their mentality had changed. Yeah. They're now ready.
Gung ho, let's go.
Let's do it. let's do it. Which is kind of funny because that's kind of what America is. They love their war. So it's like, they want to fight. They are big fighters. So it played into their mentality finally.
And just to wrap up, there are some horrible side effects that happened in America following on from Pearl Harbor. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but the Americans brutally persecuted Japanese Americans living in America following Pearl Harbor. There was a bit of a distrust about Japanese Americans in general and Japan as a country and the culture. So they basically locked up 120,000 people of Japanese descent in America. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which basically allowed them to imprison and persecute and relocate some of these Japanese descendants. Some of them second and third generation Japanese descendants, meaning they are naturalized American citizens.
Yeah.
And in 1988, Ronald Reagan officially apologized, and they paid $20,000 to each surviving person that was detained there. But a bit of horrible history there.
Yeah. Classic, isn't it?
Yeah, that sort of wraps up what I want to talk about Pearl Harbor. I think it's probably the most cataclysmic event from World War II on the American side anyway. It leads directly to the defeat of the Empire of Japan. It brings the US into the war, their industrial might, and kind of spells the end for Japan, and then later Germany and Italy, although you could say that the Soviets were already being there. And that's that.
That's that. Well, thank you, mate. I enjoyed that. I love learning about different... I actually didn't know as much. I thought I knew a lot about Pearl Harbor, but I actually learned quite a lot there.
Good.
So
Glad you did.
That was nice. I enjoyed that quite a lot. Yeah, thank you. We're starting on season 2 now, and this is... we've got many ideas that we want to bring forward. We've got lots of stuff that we want to... We've been talking about a lot. We've had a nice break, so we feel ready to go for the next stuff, and so we're excited. You know, doing more topics like Pearl Harbor, some World War II stuff, some stuff really far back in the day, maybe some kind of niche subjects as well. We've got some really cool ideas that we're coming up with at the moment, and we're really excited to do them. So thank you for the episode, mate.
Thank you. No, thank you for listening. As always, Joe, a great person to just talk at for an hour.
Cheers, man. Hey. Well, we're back. We're doing it consistently now. So cheers, and have a good one.
See you later. Thanks a lot.
Cheers. Bye bye.